Welcome to another episode of Rich Politics. And tonight, my guest is a member of the Welsh Parliament, or Senedd, formerly known as the Welsh Assembly. Hefin David was elected in 2016 as a member of the Senedd for Caerphilly for Welsh Labour. It won't come as much of a surprise to many of you. Many of you that know me, I'm no fan of Welsh Labour, either here in Wales or elsewhere. But that doesn't mean we can't have open discussion, debate, or even friends who have opposing political opinions. After what is rare these days, I had a pleasant exchange on Twitter over referendums and was keen to have Hefin to come on, talk about his journey into politics, his position on referendums, and his thoughts on politics here in Wales and the future. Hefin, welcome to Rich Politics.
Hi, Richard.
I'm so excited to have you on. And firstly, let me say congratulations on your recent victory on winning the seat back there in Caerphilly. You've been elected there since 2016. I actually bumped into you on the campaign. We were with Abolish, as you know, and it was refreshing to see someone from Labour. Now, I have to say this to all of our viewers. This is the first time ever that I've had someone on the show here who is from the opposing side. Well, I say opposing side because, as many of you know, I'm not a great fan of Labour. It doesn't mean to say, though, that I don't have friends within the Labour Party, here in my own constituency, for example, and around the country, but more importantly, an elected official such as Hefin David with me today. And Hefin, I'm so excited to have you on. I got a lot of questions now that I've got a Labour elected official on the show, and I'm going to be nice.
I've heard the rumours about you in Abolish, actually. I had heard the rumours. So I'm not unprepared.
Well, I think we're not going to discuss Abolish's results because I think that's a sore subject for the moment. Suffice to say, I bet you are. Yes, I'm sure you are. Suffice to say, it's been an interesting year or 15, 18 months for a lot of people around the country, Hefin, with the pandemic and the restrictions and lockdowns, and the vaccine rollout here in Wales has been very successful, one of the most successful vaccine rollouts across the UK and around the world, actually, as Welsh Labour keep reminding us, as you know. I just want to find out a little bit about you before I ask you the questions, because the reason why I want you on the show is because I picked up a tweet from you a few months ago when you made a speech about referendums and your thoughts on that, which we're going to discuss a little bit later, why you think we shouldn't have them. For a whole range of reasons. But first of all, you're a Welsh boy. How did you get into politics? What was your journey?
Well, I started getting involved in the 1980s when I was about 4 or 5 years old, would you believe? My father was a Rhymney Valley District Councillor. He was also head teacher of my primary school. And after school, he'd be off to meetings and I'd have no choice but to go along with him very often. So I saw him in the council chamber and planning committee, being yelled at, usually by fellow Labour members. It was that kind of, the 80s was like, in local politics, was rough and raw the way that it isn't today.
Yeah.
But the fundamental issue, what I remember most clearly about that time was the miners' strike. And I remember, I was lucky, my father was head teacher of the school, so he wasn't on strike. But friends of mine who I still know today had parents on strike. And I remember the dinner tickets and the fact that there'd be a crowd of kids going for dinner tickets. There was a very clear divide in school amongst those who were on strike and those who weren't. And those divisions in politics, politics is everything. Politics is life. And those divisions have always concerned me. And, we did everything we could to support our community. We used to go around with food parcels for those parents who were on strike. Lots of things went on in the community. And, it was an incredibly tough time, but we were united as a community in supporting those people on strike. And that's basically my earliest memories of politics.
So I think it was in the families, so to speak, then, because your dad was engaged in political, issues. And I think
people often think, Rich, the Wyn David MP is my father. Can I just clarify now? He isn't, right? And
Wyn David, if you're watching, I doubt you are, but this is not your son.
Yeah, absolutely, that's true.
I did read that somewhere. Yeah, I was just making sure, and I did mention it before we went on air as well. So I mean, for a lot of people like myself, I was never engaged in politics. I got involved in 2016, the whole Brexit, division in the country we had here in Wales as well, as you know, which we're not going to discuss today. I think that's what got me involved. I mean, I was one of those who just sat in front of the television, watched Question Time and shouted at it a lot. And my wife said, listen, stop shouting, and why don't you try and get elected? And I failed twice, and I said, well, love, that was bad advice, so I'm not going to do it again.
Well, fair. I mean, you should always give credit to anyone who's prepared to stand for election and stand up for their views, and aside from the hard right, who can be very difficult in counts, for example. But the vast majority, by far the huge majority of candidates who stand are standing on a platform they believe in, that they genuinely think will make the world better. You touched on Brexit. Those people who supported Brexit genuinely believe that it would make the world better, and I've got no issue with that.
No. Well, I know I was listening to some of the debates in the chamber this week, the Internal Market Act and stuff like that, and contributions to that, and what's happening around the whole Brexit kind of deal, the aftermath of it, really, because there are still clearly issues like the Northern Ireland Protocol, for example, and of fishing waters. And there's so many issues that Brexit actually didn't achieve what a lot of us Brexiteers thought it would. And I think there's still some big questions yet to be answered. But listen, I don't get me talking about Brexit now, because I don't want to talk about Brexit. But so your journey. So listen, so your father was into politics. You witnessed it and saw it. And did you start engaging from a young age? Was it like in school or university that got you thinking politically? What was it that really triggered you to get into it?
Yeah, well, it was that early experience of the miners' strike. I remember going out delivering leaflets with my dad and his colleagues. My dad's still a councillor, by the way. He's going to stand down this year. He'll be 70. I think he'll be 77, 78 now. He's probably earned his retirement. But I kind of grew up with all of that. And it fascinated me. Also, the mechanics of politics fascinated me. I remember when Michael Foot stopped being leader of the Labour Party, and I knew nothing about the reasons why. All I knew was I was a bit disappointed, to be honest with you. So I just, I kind of grew up with that. And, one thing you should never do is make politics the sole focus of your life. So I was an academic in my later career as a university lecturer, so there was other things I was doing. But I was, kind of always interested in how it all worked, and also the issues involved, most importantly. And I just kind of carried on being involved through the 90s and into 2000. I was elected to the community council. Just being involved, really.
Yeah, I know, because I've seen your passion for the community in Caerphilly. It's quite clear, the evidence of the work that you do, and I congratulate you on that. I just wonder though, why Labour though? What attracted you to Labour? Now, I know you can go back to the 80s, right, and you can go back to the Thatcher years, which a lot of people in Wales do. But we've moved on, a lot since then.
Yeah.
Like 2 decades. We've moved on from the kind of Margaret Thatcher, stop me having milk in school kind of narrative. I mean, what was it? Because I growing up my family were Labour. We were always Labour for the very reasons you've mentioned. The 80s were, in Wales, very, very hard. Conservatives were the devils, if you like, and you'd never vote them. But things have changed slightly. We've seen a shift, I'm sure. But why was it the Labour Party for you? What attracted you to stand with them and for them?
Well, let's take the starting point. No political party is perfect. Every political party contains a range of different views on a range of different issues. And it's very hard for a party to reconcile all those issues. But parties are as natural to politics as churches are to religion. You need a place to debate your views. And I looked at each of the parties, and I've thought about this question, Richard. I've looked at each of the parties.
How old were you then when you were looking at this? How old were you?
Oh, I joined the Labour Party when I was 1994. So I was, what was I?
Because you're 2 years younger than me. 1977 you were born, weren't you?
Yeah, so I was 1994. So I was 16. Just turned 16, 17.
Right, okay.
I joined the Labour Party. I would have joined earlier, but I gave it to the leader of the council, my application form, the leader of the council, and he lost it. Now, whether that was deliberate or not, him and my father didn't get on. So whether that was deliberate or not, I don't know. But that's politics here, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, so each of the parties has a core belief, and the Conservative Party's core belief was kind of a paternalism that in the 50s. Now is more about market and competition. I think Plaid Cymru's core belief is independence for Wales. I'm not sure of what Liberal Democrats, liberalism, whatever, how you define that. Now, at the heart of the Labour Party is social justice, which means the people who I live in my community with, people like me and my colleagues and friends and people I live around, need better from the state. And I still believe the Labour Party is best placed to deliver that for people. And it's always flawed, it's always difficult, it's always a challenge, but I still believe at the heart of the Labour Party is that belief in social justice, which is why I still am Labour and have always been.
I think I hear what you're saying. I think my early years, my family, as I've said, were Labour supporters, and everyone in my community in Llanelli, where I'm from originally, that's what we supported them. But I think as I started to engage in politics in latter years of my life, I'm only 46 now, but I just it didn't represent the Labour Party that I remember when I was younger. I know things change, things are progressive, and I've just found it personally, if I'm honest with you, very difficult to support what I consider Labour to be now, more of a socialist left-wing kind of a party. And you can challenge me on this. This is how I see it, as supporting a lot of the woke stuff that's out there. I'm not saying that you particularly do, because each to their own, but it kind of, that's the picture it paints to me. I might be completely wrong, and I'm open to be wrong, of course, but that's the kind of idea that myself and a lot of people I talk to, that's how they see kind of Welsh Labour, as this kind of, far left wing, kind of political party that's, that's virtue signaling every time on woke nonsense. And I mean, I'm not having to go at you personally, as you know, Hefin, on the show. You take that, can you see that's the kind of picture we get here in Wales?
I understand that view, because I've knocked doors in Caerphilly, and a number of people on the doorstep said that to me a few times. They said, I want to vote for you, but I'm really concerned about this what you call virtue signaling. And I completely understand why people would perceive that, as particularly older people were saying it to me, people in, towards retirement age, who remember the Labour Party, as you said, were raising this for me. Now, what a political party needs to be, it needs to be there for everybody. The communities I live in, the party needs to be there. You will see I do my Facebook Lives. I am there for every single person in this community, regardless of how they voted. Now, I strongly believe that those disadvantaged voices, those minority voices, need a voice in our society. And that is absolutely part of what the Labour Party is about. But it isn't mutually exclusive. That means it doesn't then mean that other people should then be excluded because Labour Party stands up for LGBT rights. Well, that's absolutely the right thing to do. That doesn't mean then that those people who are, middle-aged married heterosexuals should be excluded. That's absurd. You cannot. Well, it's the wrong thing to do, basically. And I just feel that it's a caricature. This idea that the Labour Party has become this woke party. I mean, there's certain voices may speak up for certain issues that are not of interest to the majority. But nonetheless, you've got Senedd members in their communities, close to their communities, who really do stand up for everyone, regardless of their party and their vote. And that's what my politics is about. Yeah. Standing up for everyone, but making sure those voices who can be sidelined are heard.
Yeah, I'm quite critical of Labour, not just Welsh Labour, but Labour generally. Some of the things that Keir Starmer's the leader and things. But I met Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales, for the first time actually at the leaders' debate. I went down with our leader at the time, the party I was with, and do you know what? I after all the grief I've given him on social media, I know he doesn't read it. His comms team normally do the stuff for him, obviously.
I don't think he bothers. I think he said himself he doesn't really.
Yeah, he don't bother.
Which is why he's a little bit happier than me.
I was going to say he's probably a lot happier than the rest of us. Yeah. And do you know what? I went into the room and I offered to make him a cup of tea. Now he didn't know who I was. And he thought I worked there. And I did do a slight little comment to him, mention about the pubs not being open and stuff. But it was done in a jest, a bit of a laugh. And I have to say, and I've said this, and I'll say this to our viewers, although I don't agree with a lot of what Matt Drakeford as First Minister, with lockdowns and decisions he's made, we've all got opinions. I have to say, I found him such a lovely bloke. He was a lovely man. He was very fatherly, very warm. He wasn't aggressive, or he was very nice. And I thought, I can see now why people, when he's around knocking doors, even though my perception of him is that, who does this guy think he is, locking us down, doing this, doing that, as well as the UK government, because they haven't got it perfect either, let's be honest. And I was like, but actually, he's a nice guy. And I could see, and people are asking me, why do people still vote for Welsh Labour? Is it because their grandparents did? And I think, there's more to it than that. No, it isn't. I think things are, if I'm honest, I think things are changing because people are voting differently. We've seen it in the general election 2019, up in North Wales where some of the red wall turned blue. But I think Mark Drakeford as the First Minister, people felt safe with him during a pandemic because of this cautious approach. Now, I might agree or disagree with a lot of the things, and my viewers will know I've been very vocal on social media about things I disagree with. But at the same time, you can't take away from the fact of the human nature that is there with him. And he's quite endearing. He's quite a nice person, isn't he?
He's when we went out with him, he was mobbed everywhere we went in Caerphilly. He was, people wanted to speak to him about practical things. I remember an airline pilot who lives in Caerphilly, who works for one of the airline companies, the holiday companies, spoke to him at length about the policy there. and he answered every single question, and he was honest in every answer. He didn't say things that he thought they wanted to hear in order to get their votes, which, as a candidate does frighten you a little bit.
Yeah.
When he's not necessarily agreeing with the constituent, but that's actually absolutely the right thing to do, is tell the truth. And he was, let's be honest, he wasn't my first choice for leader of Welsh Labour. And, but he was absolutely the right person at the right time in the right place, in my view. And I just feel that, he took a very pragmatic, honest approach, and he's still taking that approach to the pandemic. Yeah. And I found that impressive. I've got criticisms of the way the Welsh government are doing some things. I'd like to see a levy for social care, a tax levy for social care to deal with the crisis in social care. The Welsh government's quite cautious about it. I prefer them to go further. There's issues I want to challenge the Welsh government on, but Mark Drakeford has absolutely earned the right to be First Minister. And is doing a very, very good job in the sense that you've just described.
Yeah, well, I think, look, my criticisms of him, my opinion, but the polls say something completely different, because during the pandemic, the polls shown that he was, far more in favour. People were more in favour of him than they were of Boris Johnson. And by the way, for my viewers, don't worry, I'm not being converted to Labour here. I'm just being honest. This is an honest discussion. And yeah, because of course people were angry at him as well. Of course, when the lockdowns came in, which we don't want to talk about too much. Restrictions.
And people were angry. People were angry with me as well. When I was in my constituency, when I was doing a Facebook Live, for example. I really believe in these Facebook Live sessions and the big power of social media to contact people. I answered hundreds of questions in an hour and a half session, answering hundreds of questions, and I just feel like people wanted to explain why they were so upset, but it was always respectful. But people were still very angry at many points. But the only way you can respond to people is be honest, and explain. And as long as you're doing things for the right reasons, I think it's easier to be honest and explain, and without doing things for the wrong reasons.
You're right, and it could be quite easy for me to go on about things that the non-essential essential argument. When he locked things down, when pubs could open but couldn't sell beer, and I've said all this stuff before, and obviously members of the public were angry, but you've experienced it in your constituency of Caerphilly there. all those kind of issues. But when we look at what's happening in Wales right now, we need to move on. I think I was at a Freedom March on Saturday in London, and it was important to me because I feel as if, God, this is my personal opinion. You're a politician, elected official. My personal opinion as a member of the public is that the government have overreached. It's almost like a nanny state, interfering into our daily lives with some of these restrictions, and some of them in the past have been absolutely absurd. And there's no proof that they've actually, not helped the virus not to spread. Some of the stuff they've made up, like standing up or sitting down in a pub, for example. just crazy things. And I'm all for freedom, of course. I do know there's a pandemic. I don't deny it. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, one of those. But I'm pro-choice and pro-freedom. And I think, Wales is completely different. And where people forget is that the people I was speaking to, not just during campaign time, Hefin, is they don't know what's devolved and what's not devolved. They kind of put it all together. Boris is the Prime Minister. And a lot of people up until the pandemic didn't even know that Wales had a First Minister. I mean, it was literally like that. And I think things are shifting and changing. Now, what concerns me, I'll ask you about this in a few moments, because I want to get to the referendum stuff, because our time, we've got about 40 minutes left. I want to, the whole argument where Mr. Drakeford now is talking about the union. He's published his 20 proposals. I've read them. I can narrow it down to the back of a fag packet, if I'm honest with you. That's my opinion. Just more powers and politicians in Wales, but we want Westminster to pay for it. That's my opinion. Okay. Put it out there. I mean, is this not soft independence? Is Welsh Labour, are they say they're pro-union. Mark Drakeford himself has said, look, I believe in the United Kingdom. I believe in a voluntary kind of relationship. But isn't this soft independence? And I know you're not pro-Welsh independence. I've heard you, say a lot of things about that. But isn't it a form of soft independence, though?
I think the concern, this is the whole Welsh Government policy on this is driven by a concern that the United Kingdom is breaking up, and it's breaking up by stealth. I think that the fundamental concern is that. Now, if you look at through the pandemic, now I got into a debate on Twitter with John Rentoul, the independent journalist, who said that the Welsh Government's policy was basically the same as the English Government policy, which was the same as the Scottish policy. And there's a school of thought that that's actually, in some ways, reasonable. It's just, they're all listening to the same chief medical officer. But I do feel that in order to connect with people, you've got to get power closest to the people who are affected by it. So I've already made reference to Facebook Live and contact with constituents. I think one of the reasons we left the European Union was people felt that power distance. They felt a real distance from the centre of the European Union. We had a brand new train station open in Pengham in my constituency, £1 million of European money. People, and when I knocked doors, people were really delighted because it was taking cars off their streets. They still voted to leave the European Union because there was no one from the European Union that they could berate and say what they've getting wrong. Now, the thing about the pandemic was, with Welsh politics, they had members of the Senedd they could contact directly and speak to about their concerns. That was a connection that wasn't made with Brexit. Now, the concern I've got is that the UK state is starting to fragment in the same way the European Union did. And I'm a Eurosceptic. I understand why we left the European Union, and I sympathise with those people who feel that way. But not that I've actually voted Remain, but it was a reluctant vote.
Yeah.
And I could feel that Britain is starting to go in exactly the same way. And what this is an attempt to try and bring Britain back together in a structure that's going to work and get politicians as close to people as possible. That's what it's about. I genuinely don't think Mark Drakeford's not interested in power anymore. He's going to be going in a couple of years. What he wants to leave behind.
Well, on that, can you give us some insight into that? Anything behind the scenes you can tell us with him going, or?
No, we don't talk about it, to be honest with you. I mean, it's impolite, isn't it? It's in any group of people, it would be impolite to go up to someone and say, when you're going to go. So you don't have those kinds of conversations. But he's going to say. But the point is, he wants to leave a legacy that brings the Britain, United Kingdom back together.
But don't you not think that the other side of the argument is that he's created divisions within the union by some of the stuff that he's put out, over his relationship with Boris Johnson, for example, the lack of contact and communication during the pandemic. Clearly a lot of issues that the Welsh government have accused the UK government of, overriding, an internal market bill is one of them, for example, when they're talking about infrastructure and building roads, we'll do the M4 relief road because you guys promised in your manifesto and you've gone back in it, all those kinds of things. He hasn't helped those divisions, though, has he really?
No, I think the issue is, Boris Johnson didn't turn up to joint first ministerial meetings. It was always Michael Gove that turns up for those meetings, So there is a bit of it, and they always the UK government always refers to the Welsh administration or the Welsh government. There's a little bit of needle there, and I think that needle is coming from London. I think the Conservatives, by instinct, want to retain power centrally, which is fair enough. That was the policy in John Major's time. Keep power centrally. So even if you accept your premise, it does go both ways. It takes two to create an argument. But I think the fundamental issue is that if you don't do something about it, if you don't try and bring these things back together, then you'll end up splitting apart by stealth, and that's the real problem. That's where we'll end up. And that's the ambition. The ambition is to create. Well, one of the problems we've got is we haven't got a written constitution in this country. We haven't got a structured state. America's got a written constitution that sets out powers very clearly. Powers aren't set out clearly in the United Kingdom.
So you would argue this constitutional chaos is because we don't have it. We need constitutional reform. It needs to be reformed. That's really what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think we need a structured state. I would argue that the regions of England need regional parliaments as well. Because it gets power close to the people. And I think a structured constitution in the UK would, what the Liberal Democrats are advocating to reach across the aisle. I think that's actually, yes, that's quite right. And, give a roadmap so it shows politicians and people exactly where powers lie, and that is a structure that isn't changed by some party that comes into power. It's not transient. It's structured and it's fixed. I think that would be a very powerful thing.
Talking about constitutional reform, referendums. This is why I got you on you. This is how I engaged you on Twitter. I say you were very pleasant in your replies to me. I didn't get blocked as I do by some of the Welsh ministers in the cabinet.
I've got a policy now, not blocking anyone at all.
You can mute them. That's always a good option as well.
I don't think I've even muted anyone.
I think we're all guilty of saying things on Twitter that we wish we hadn't said, yourself included. So we won't go there. We've all done it, and it's not the real world, is it?
No, it's not.
So going back to referendums, now I'm going to play a video here so our viewers can see it. And this is your speech on referendums. So I just want our viewers to watch this, and
when
I'll come back and
the
speak to
House of Commons calls a vote, he shouts the word division. When we hold a vote here, we are dividing. And that is the point of having a vote. But the reason we divide is so that the country doesn't have to. And if people are angry with us for the choices we make when we divide, they have the opportunity then to take that out on us at election time when they can vote for someone who divided in the way they wanted them to. The problem with a referendum is it puts the responsibility for that division on the people of the country. And once that division has taken place, it is incredibly difficult then to bring the country back together afterwards. Following an election, those on the losing side will still have a voice in the parliament to which they voted. The other problem with a referendum is it simplifies choices. It simplifies choices to the point of absurdity. Yes or no. In real life, in real politics, every choice we make has a consequence for someone else. Every single decision we make in this chamber has a consequence for someone else. We are not being honest with people if we say to them, when you vote in a referendum, your choice will be honoured, and that will be the end of it, and everything will be okay. Our democracy is not functioning. The only way through right now, reluctantly, is a referendum. But we need to look at this. We need to think, how can we repair our democracy? There is a way forward, and that way forward is reforming our electoral system.
Well done, David Rowlands.
I'm rather reluctant to follow on from the last person to speak, because he said so many good and right things before I even stand on my feet. And I congratulate you on the way that you delivered that.
So, Hefin, that was a rousing speech. Even David Rowlands actually congratulated you, of all people, on that. I mean, what is your take? Let me give you my personal opinion first. I believe in referendums. I think they're important. I think we've talked about reforming, our democracy. We've talked about constitutional changes that need to be made. I see referendums as part of that. I don't see them as divisive. I see them as giving, in a democratic society, the people, the electorate, if you like, the right, not just in an election, but, even as we've seen with Brexit, the opportunity to voice their opinion. Because if you're elected for 4 or 5 years and, and you're an elected member and you're in power for that length of time, surely the public still have a right, even before the next election, to have a say on certain matters. I'll give you an example. One of my big things, and with the Assembly, the change of the name of the Assembly from the Welsh Parliament from Welsh Assembly. Now, I'm not saying there should have been a referendum on it, but my question is, those powers, it was decided by politicians who are paid by the same institution that they're part of, but yet the people didn't vote for an assembly. They voted for a parliament. Sorry, they voted for an assembly. Now I understand, we can, but why do you think referendums are bad for our country in a democratic society, or at least you don't agree with them?
Well, I believe in representative democracy. Representative democracy. Therefore, we elect people that we choose to represent us in a parliament. I think we need to have a single transferable vote system, which enables more parties to be reflected by their share of the vote. So, let's not forget this system we had in for the Senedd. Labour got 40% of the vote, they got 50% of the seats. That's still not proportional. We need to have a single transferable vote system. The parties are reflected by, obviously there'd be a flaw, but you have a proportional system. So I start with representative democracy, which is currently imperfect, which needs reforming. The problem with a referendum in an imperfect representative democracy is that it does two things. It raises an issue up to a level of salience that it didn't previously have. So let me give you an example. If we had a referendum tomorrow on capital punishment, people aren't thinking today about capital punishment. It's not the conversation. You go into a pub and people aren't talking about it, are they? People aren't going on about capital punishment. Maybe there's a small group of people who feel strongly, but the vast majority of people, if you had a referendum on it, I bet you it would divide families. It would become massively controversial. It would be the only issue we would talk about for months on end. And it would obscure everything else. And then whoever lost the referendum would be told, you lost, shut up, sit down, be quiet. Now, in a representative democracy, if I lose a vote, I'm not told to be quiet. I can carry on speaking and I can carry on advocating my cause. So if I wanted to introduce a reform, that reform failed. That doesn't mean then in a representative democracy, I stop talking about that reform. I can carry on talking about it because I'm directly elected on behalf of the people who care about that issue, and I can keep on going. Referendums raise low salience issues to high salience, and then they don't actively resolve them because still half the population who are on the losing side, depending on the proportion, obviously, are told to be quiet. And I just think that creates division and it creates problems, and it's very simplistic. And I think an effective, proportional, representative democracy works much better. One other thing I'd say, a party that can't get their views onto the agenda through direct elections can use a referendum to raise the salience of the issue to a level that it doesn't really warrant. So let's go take one we both agree on, Welsh independence. Welsh independence has very low salience amongst most people. Whatever you think of the polls, people will answer questions and say 32% if you don't know. But most people really aren't thinking much about it. If you had a referendum tomorrow, that would be the number one issue everybody's talking about above everything else. And one way or another, one group of people would be told to shut up about it forever. And I just feel that's not the way forward.
No, I know you're not for Welsh independence, but some of Labour people I've spoken to, certainly they're moving towards that from what I've been witnessing here in Wales.
So the way for them to do it is to persuade the Labour Party, to change its policy.
Yeah, that'd be a big change. I think with referendums, though, I think I think it might be a case of what we saw happen with Brexit, because it did divide the country. Of course, we saw that it did it did have an impact, and I won't deny that. But I think at the same time, surely in a democracy, there are certain things, and depends on what those issues are. You mentioned the high and the lows, but I think there are some issues that the politicians must go to the people that elected them, to represent them, over issues such as Brexit, but other issues that are of great importance to the future of our country and our nation, our democracy. Surely certain things should be put to a referendum. Not things like, should we allow people to stop smoking in beer gardens? I'm not talking about the small stuff, but clearly there are some real big political issues sometimes that I think deserve a referendum. Do you not think that?
I completely understand that view. And the problem with it is who decides what those issues are. Politicians ultimately will decide those issues are. So should we have a referendum on what the issue should be? There's lots of problems with that view. And I'm saying take a step back. And the step back should be, before you get to having referendums, let's elect our politicians properly first, which is single transferable vote proportional systems. Now, maybe ultimately there are issues, as you say, that could be the subject of a referendum. If there are enough parties in a parliament able to get together to agree it, but that would be subject to a proportional system. And also, maybe so in that case, maybe I'm talking about a moratorium on referenda until you sort out the electoral system. I don't know, but at this point in time, I don't think further referendums help. And if you had a proportional system, a party would have to stand on its platform and be elected or otherwise on its platform. If you then had a coalition of some kind that represents the opinion of the majority of people, over 50 or 60% of people, then perhaps you might get agreement for a referendum on those terms, which would be helpful. But you would still have the outcome that would leave a lot of people disenfranchised post-referendum. And, and one of the things I think at this point in time, just for the moratorium on referendum argument, we've got divided societies. We've got people who are fighting against each other. You mentioned earlier virtual signaling and all the rest of it. Now that's just another element of the division. I want to try and bring people together. One of the reasons I'm speaking to you, we've got to speak to each other. People of different views need to talk. And that dialogue means getting that right first before we talk about more division and gain. And I just think society is so fractured. I would rather see things brought together first, reconstructed, and then worry about referendums down the line of ways, and that's quite far down the line, really.